Hello everyone, and welcome to the July version of the Russ Phillips team newsletter at Keller Williams Realty. Today we're going to try to answer a couple of questions that are floating around out there with all the news coverage about a hot market. Number one, how do you correctly value a property? How do you know that you're in the right ballpark for what the place is actually worth? And secondly, what about the appraiser? What the appraiser's opinion is that really etched in stone as the final end-all be-all valuation of any given piece of property? So first, let's go back to how to correctly value a place. Well, 90% of us, according to research, start online these days. And so it's very easy for people to develop opinions when they're sitting in front of a computer screen in their pajamas. So for sellers, you need to represent well in the digital world. How you impress people on the various websites out there is going to be critical to actually getting them to cross your front door threshold and look at your property and consider it in person. Besides that, we also have to sell not just to the general public, but also to the realtors that represent them and to the appraisers that consummate the deal with the lender. So let's get into a few specifics about that. Is it all about price per square foot? Well, my question would be, how can it be? Some properties have bigger lots, some properties have pools where others don't. Some of them are a little older, some of them are a little newer. Some will have more robust interior finish work and detail than the subject property. So there's all kinds of variables that really need to be considered. And you and your agent should be able to sit down and have an intelligent conversation about each of those things and how they play into a property's value. Again, I see it so many times. People just want to add up the average price per square foot from sales, or they tell me, gosh, the house down the street just sold for X dollars. That might or might not make a difference. The truth is, you've got to pick the correct sales that are most applicable to the subject property and then make the correct adjustments based upon things like gross living area, whether or not there was a pool, outbuildings, guest quarters, casitas, whether or not there's a fireplace, a sprinkler system, a fence. There's any number of adjustments that could be made. So it's not as easy as just shooting from the hip. So the myth out there is that every property has a specific number as its value, when in truth, value is determined a lot by the person looking at it. And all of us are humans, whether it's the buyer or the realtor or the appraiser. So let's talk about some bias that each brings to the table here. The buyer has probably looked at Realtor.com and feels like, as having done that maybe they've got some level of expertise based upon what's sitting out there on the market currently. But in truth, properties that haven't sold do little to establish property value. Now, realtors tend to want to talk about price per square foot. But then what about when you start looking at differences? Like maybe the house down the street sold for X dollars, but it backs up to a busy road. Maybe that had a negative impact on the property value that wouldn't apply to the subject property at hand. Maybe one of the sales down the road had a pool. Maybe one had a lake view. There's any number of variables that need to be considered, and so price per square foot is not really a fair assessment, and it really oversimplifies. So what you need in your realtor is the expertise to be able to go through and pull relevant comps and then make adjustments for things that were not equal between the sold properties and the subject property. Now let's talk about the appraiser for a minute. If you remember the mortgage meltdown of 2007-2008, a lot of that was happening because appraisers across the country seemed like they were rubber stamping contracts and transactions with values that just made the deal close. It was a very loose environment. Now there's new standards in place about how appraisers are supposed to act. And quite honestly, a number of them will wax conservative if they're uncomfortable in the territory in which they're working, or if they're in a price range they're not familiar with. I can tell you I've seen it before where in the middle of a luxury transaction, we ended up with an appraiser that was not familiar with the local luxury market, and we had to work to get his appraisal thrown out and get a new one ordered from one that was familiar. And the deal lived or died based upon what happened there. So it is interesting to note that appraisers and how they work, it's not them pulling out a slide rule and a table and coming up with a specific number. The truth is, market value is going to be a range for any property. and not just a specific sales price. And then where that specific contract sales price comes in depends largely upon what the realtors are able to negotiate and the seller and the buyer are willing and able to do. True market value is defined by when a willing buyer and a willing seller come together, both are educated and neither is under duress. So at times we have to work through an appraisal. Recently we closed a deal where the appraisal came in tens of thousands of dollars under the contract sales price. And as the listing agent, I had to be able to address why that was incorrect. The end result was we preserved the sales price for the seller, went to closing, and through good communication with the buyer's agent and the buyer, we're able to have everybody feel good about the sales price. Now that's worth something. So I want to dispel this notion that just because it's on paper with an appraiser's license and signature at the end, that is specifically and only what that property is worth. Now we can get into more specifics as it relates to your property or any property that you're looking at, and we would love to do that. So give us a call here at the Russ Phillips team and we'll dig into the details for you. Until next time, hope you're having a great summer and keep cool out there.